Hello, welcome to this latest learning our way through the Catechism. It's or a convert encounters the Catechism. Today we're on chapter 1, chapter 1, subsection 4, paragraph 39, page 23 in this. And it's entitled, How Can We Speak About God? What I'd like to do before I read the text is to comment in advance rather than as I go. I dare say I might comment as I go a bit, but I'd like to set what we're about to find in a kind of historical context. And the challenge here, of course, is to not try to be too pretentious or too simplistic. But essentially, in the history of the Church, there have always been two spiritualities working together. They emerged particularly with Pseudo-Dionysius in the 5th century, I think it was. But essentially they are what's called the via negativa and the via positiva, in Greek, the apophatic and the cataphatic way. I sometimes, when I was learning the Greek originally, I remember thinking, well, how do I remember the difference between apophatic and cataphatic? And I thought, well, lots of people like cats. So the cataphatic is the via positiva, the way in which one talks about things, and the apophatic, the via negativa, is when one doesn't talk about things. And the reason is this. What we're about to be told in the Catechism is that we have to be very careful what language we use, because language can't hold God. We could go back one step and say that the great danger, and this is the foundation of the via negativa, the apophatic way, is that the moment you think about God, you're already into idolatry. The idea that our mind, this is the nonsense of Cartesianism, I think, therefore I am. I don't think very clearly, therefore I'm not very much. But the idea that our minds can contain God or think God or hold God or conceive of God, well, it's a dreadful thing to say. It's so nonsensical. So what are we to do with the fact that we have to use our minds? Well, if you like, the via positiva and via negativa are matched to some extent by the complementarity of the head and the heart. The head thinks things, the heart feels things, intuits things. You need them both. They have to work together to make a full picture. And if you have a sentimental spirituality without any hard-nosed oversight, it can become very indulgent and unbounded. If you have a very cerebral spirituality that's just in terms of propositions, it can become ruthlessly inflexible, lacking entirely the compassion of the heart. So the head and the heart have to work together. The via positiva and the via negativa, apophatic and cataphatic, have to work together. And what does this mean in practice? It means we've got to be very careful. Well, the via negativa says you've got to be very careful about the language you use for God, because it might be thought that your language summarizes God, contains God, is the last word about God. So to say that God is a father, for example, is not true. Fatherhood derives from God, not God from fatherhood. You may remember that in the 19th century, particularly, there was this sense that God was just a projected figure. And when we said of the human psyche, both Freud and Feuerbach were very much into that. But let's step away from that for the moment, and let's just go back to saying that it's almost easier and more accurate to say what God is not than to say what he is. To say what he's not is to say, well, he's clearly not contained by these things. To say what he is suggests he might be contained by these things. So although this sounds a bit pedantic, we're just being invited by the Catechism at this next point to be careful of how we use language, and to remember that these two forms of thinking need to balance one another and go hand in hand. You might say, for example, that the via negativa, much celebrated by the Desert Fathers and by Pseudo-Dionysius, is the language of awe and mystery and sort of. And you might say that the via positiva, celebrated, well, more by the scholastic tradition. Let's try and say some things about God that are true, is the language of celebration and vivacity and creativity. The via positiva is all about trying to put God into art and beauty. And then the via negativa says, but don't worship the art or the beauty. Maybe we should get rid of them all completely. And so, of course, Puritanism is a disastrous form of high-octane negativa, utterly unbalanced by the positiva. So that's just to give a background of how we do caution about the way we use language. Now let's listen to the Catechism, put that into more concise words. You may of course say, well, why didn't you just read the Catechism? It's so much clearer than what you've just been saying. So here goes. In defending the ability of human reason to know God, the Church is expressing her confidence in the possibility about speaking about him to all men and with all men, and therefore of dialogue with other religions, with philosophy and with science, as well as unbelievers and atheists. In other words, here's the via positiva, we've got to be able to use language. Language has got to be in common, reliable, it's instrumental, it works, but it only works up to a point. So let's use it up to the point we can use it, and let's try and be aware of the point where we have to be careful how we use it. But meanwhile, what a gift it is. We have language, there are things we can say about God, the via positiva, the cataphatic stuff. 40. Since our knowledge of God is limited, well, isn't it just? And our language about him is equally limited. We can name God only by taking creatures as our starting point. Of course, the very word God is awful. I mean, it should almost be banned. Of course, the Jews have banned it. They go G***D. You shouldn't use a divine name. Because who knows what the word God means? It's very unhelpful. It can mean 40 different things. No wonder we talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we know who we're talking about. No wonder we talk about Yahweh, I am that I am. I shall be who I will be. I done what I've done. The name given to Moses, who shall I say sent me? Say, I am that I am sent you. Well, there we go. Actually, I am that I am is just the most wonderful name, because insofar from containing God, it just leads you ever deeper into God. I mean, what a brilliant name. The foundation of all being, of all living, of all consciousness and unconsciousness, the amness of everything, the very thing that allows us to be self-reflective and to know ourselves a bit, and therefore to be able to know God, to know the universe. I mean, it's just the cleverest name and wisest name imaginable. But even then, the Jews, of course, were very careful to say we must be enormously hesitant in the way we speak this, and let's not use I am that I am. It's too holy. Let's instead say Adonai. So in the Bible you get the Lord, not knowing whether you're talking about Yahweh or Adonai, but it was always a way in the first covenant of trying to preserve the not too little and not too much, finding a way through. So we can only name God, health warning, if by taking creatures as our starting point, creation in other words, we look at what we can see in front of us, say, what does this tell us about the first cause? And in accordance with our limited human ways of knowing and thinking, as long as we remember how limited we are, then we're on safer ground than if we think we're not limited. I mean, again, this is the idiocy of atheism. Imagine saying imagine I mean, it's such nonsense that disbelieving in something you know nothing about is hubristic in the extreme. It's so silly. 41. All creatures bear a certain resemblance to God. This is rather lovely. This is something, again, I go back to this marvelous conversation that Sebastian Morello had. This is the idea of emanation and incarnation. All matter holding together in God, and to some extent telling us something about God himself, the extraordinary interdependence of the way organic matter works on earth, always spoilt, of course, by sin. All the carnivorousness and the predatoriness of our situation is is bruised and scarred and dislocated by our original sin, because in some very profound way that we can only talk poetically about, our disobedience has flooded, seeped, contaminated the very world we live in, running backwards and forwards in time. So all creatures bear a certain resemblance to God, most especially man, created in the image and likeness of God. That is such an extraordinary thing to say. I mean, really, it's just unbelievable when you stop and think about it. I think that if I look at another human being, there is a very big clue to who God is in that human being. It's at one level, that's a preposterous thing to say, and yet there is something exquisitely beautiful about humanity. Not only the way humanity looks and the way people function, the beauty, the extraordinary beauty of our bodies, the magnificence of the brain that we have, but the fact that it comes with a soul and with a heart and a head. We are truly wonderfully and mysteriously made, and yet, of course, in the body of an animal and profoundly flawed with animalistic appetites. The manifold perfections of creatures, their truth, their goodness, their beauty, all reflect the infinite perfection of God. For creatures do contain truth, goodness, and beauty to some extent in a fallen world, untruth, ugliness, and evil as well. But the Catechism is looking on the bright side just for the moment. Consequently, we can name God by taking his creatures' perfections as our starting point. And then here's a quote from Wisdom. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their creator. Who has not looked at the proverbial sunset? The full moon always stops me in my tracks. The beauty of trees budding, of bees pollinating. There is so much to stop us in our tracks when we look at the unbelievable imagination and beauty and interdependence of the world we live in, and we take so much for granted. Well, we can know that God is highly inventive. He loves beauty. He loves complexity. He loves simplicity. He's what a God he must be to make the world so beautiful. 42. God transcends all creatures. We ask this, that we're not talking about pantheism here. We're talking about panentheism and more than that, the creator and everything holding together in him. We must therefore, I like this phrase, we must therefore continually purify our language. I'm often accused of being pedantic about language, and I probably am. But at the back of my mind, I have this sense that the Catechism has: purify your language. Be careful. Try hard to make your language work better for the love of God. It's a kind of service, really. It's a way that someone who's been given an education wants to love God by using what he's been or she's been given to serve God, to make God more accessible. We should be careful with our instruments in the same way a musician is careful with their instrument to play in tune, to play beautifully and gracefully. Those of us who use words need to use words as our instruments to speak in tune and to speak graciously with cadences and scales, so that truth, beauty, and goodness accompany our words. Purify our language of everything that is limited, image-bound or imperfect. Here comes the via negativa. The moment you start hearing the author talk about beware of images and being image-bound, you know you're getting a good dose of the apophatic way. If we are not to confuse our image for God, or our image of God, rather. Well, both, I think. It says of God, but I think for God as well. Who is the inexpressible, the incomprehensible, the invisible, the ungraspable. This could be pseudo-Dionysius himself. All this stuff, impossible, beyond all our capacities, with human representations. This is also from the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the Anaphora. Our human words always fall short of the mystery of God. And here's the last paragraph. You can see why I wanted to give a form of introduction before doing this. Admittedly, in speaking about God like this, our language is using human modes of expression. Nevertheless, it really does attain to God himself. Gosh, it's almost as though the author alternative paragraphs are written, one by the via negativa and one by the via positiva. Here we're into the via positiva again. Language does attain God himself, though unable to express him in his infinite simplicity. Here's the balance. Likewise, we must recall that between creator and creature, no similitude can be expressed without even implying a greater dissimilitude. That's the Lateran Council 4. And here comes Aquinas, that concerning God, we cannot grasp what he is, but only what he is not, and how other beings stand in relation to him. It's quite an interesting quote by Aquinas, because really Aquinas and the scholastics are normally heard saying trying to put God into propositions. And so here we can see that Aquinas is ambidextrous. He can do both. Well, that's the end of chapter 1. And I think what we have is an invitation to complementarity in the best sense. Man and woman together. Positiva and negativa together. Awe and silence and celebration, art and creativity together. I think the moment the church moves into one dimension and exiles the other, as it often has done in history, partly because people find it difficult to hold paradox in their mind. This is not contradiction, this is definitely paradox, where these two things looking dissimilar need to work together. I think that's the difference between paradox and contradiction. So this is really rather wonderful stuff. We're about to go to chapter 2, but in the meanwhile, that's given us some things to think about. Again, thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. It's lovely to have you here.